The sound of glass shattering didn't just echo across the dining room. It echoed somewhere much deeper, somewhere inside me that had already been cracking for years. I stood frozen, staring at the pieces of my wine glass scattered across the marble floor. Red liquid spread like a stain, creeping between the tiles, while conversations around the table died one by one until silence took over. "Honestly, Elizabeth," Caroline said sharply, lowering her hand after knocking the glass from mine, "you really need to learn when you're not welcome." There it was. Not subtle, not private, not kind, just deliberate. 12 guests sat around that table, colleagues of my son Daniel, neighbors, people I barely knew, all now staring at me like I was some kind of awkward interruption in an otherwise perfect evening. I felt my cheeks burn, but I refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of her. "Caroline," Daniel said quietly, but there was no firmness in his voice. No protection. Just discomfort. That hurt more than anything. She didn't even look at him. "I mean it," she continued, folding her arms. "Every time we host something, you somehow make it about yourself. It's exhausting." Make it about myself? I had spent the entire evening helping her prepare, cooking dishes she claimed as her own, setting a table I wasn't invited to sit at until the last moment, smiling when she corrected me in front of her friends like I was a forgetful child. And now this. I began. "No," she cut me off. "You were hovering. Again. Hovering." That word had become her favorite weapon. I glanced at Daniel, waiting, hoping for him to step in. To say something. Anything. He didn't. He just sighed, rubbing his temple like this was all too much for him. "Mom," he said finally, avoiding my eyes, maybe it's better if you head home for tonight." That was it. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Not broken. Not shattered. Just still. I nodded slowly. "Of course," I said. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. I bent down, carefully placing my napkin on the table as if none of this mattered, as if dignity could be maintained through small, controlled movements. But when I straightened, I caught sight of my grandson, Oliver, standing halfway down the staircase. 7 years old. Watching everything. Confused. Silent. Learning. I forced a smile in his direction. "It's all right, sweetheart," I said gently. But I wasn't sure if I was saying it for him or for myself. The drive home felt longer than usual. Streetlights blurred past, stretching into lines as tears finally broke free. I didn't sob. I didn't wail. I just let them fall. Quietly. Steadily. Like something that had been waiting for permission. 40 years. That's how long I had lived in my home. The same small brick house. The same creaky front step. The same kitchen where I raised Daniel after his father passed away. Everything I had done, every extra shift, every sacrifice, had been for him. And tonight, I was asked to leave his home like I was temporary. Like I didn't belong. I barely remembered unlocking the door. I just knew that suddenly I was inside, standing in the hallway, the silence wrapping around me like a blanket I didn't want. My phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, but I didn't. "Daniel, I'm sorry about tonight. Caroline didn't mean it like that. She's just under a lot of pressure." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed. Deleted. Typed again. Deleted again. Finally, I locked my phone and set it face down on the table. I had nothing left to say. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that moment again. The glass falling, the silence, the way Daniel didn't look at me. By morning, exhaustion clung to me like a second skin. I made tea out of habit, though I barely tasted it. That's when I noticed something strange. The cabinet above the sink, slightly open. I frowned. I was certain I had closed everything the night before. Maybe I was just tired. Still, I stepped closer and opened it fully. Inside were old folders, tucked behind stacks of dishes I hadn't used in years. Curious, I pulled one out. Dust coated the edges. I wiped it off and opened it slowly. And that's when everything began to shift. Inside were documents. Official ones. Stamped.
Signed.
Dated. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. But as I flipped through the pages, my breath caught. Property records. Legal forms. A purchase agreement. My name. My late husband's name. And then, the address. Daniel's house. I sat down heavily at the kitchen table, the papers trembling in my hands. No, that couldn't be right. But it was. Years ago, before he passed, my husband had invested in a property, a large, beautiful house in a growing neighborhood. We had talked about renting it out. But after his death, everything had become a blur. Grief had swallowed time. And somehow, the house had stayed in my name. When Daniel and Caroline got married, they had been struggling to find a place. I remembered giving him the keys. I remembered saying, "It's yours now." But legally, I had never transferred it. Not once. I checked again.
And again.
There was no mistake. The house Daniel and Caroline lived in
was still mine.
I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. This wasn't just paperwork. This was power. Not the kind I had ever wanted, but the kind I suddenly realized I had been ignoring. All those years, all those moments I let Caroline push me aside, dictate when I could visit, how I could behave. She had done it under my roof, without even knowing. A strange feeling rose in my chest. Not anger, not revenge. Something colder, clearer, like waking up after a long sleep. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one with nothing. But that wasn't the only discovery waiting for me. Because just as I was gathering the documents, trying to steady my thoughts,
my phone rang.
It was Margaret, a neighbor from Daniel Street. I hesitated before answering. "Hello." "Elizabeth," she said, her voice uncertain. "I hope I'm not overstepping, but after what I heard about last night, I thought you should know something." My grip tightened. "What is it?" There was a pause. Then she said quietly, "I've seen Caroline. With another man." The room went completely still. And just like that, the story I thought I understood was no longer the real one. I didn't respond to Margaret right away. For a few seconds, or maybe longer, I just sat there, gripping the edge of the table so tightly my fingers started to ache. My eyes drifted back to the documents spread out in front of me, then to the window, then to nothing at all. It felt as if the world had shifted slightly off balance, like something invisible had been pushed out of place, and now everything else had to adjust around it. "What do you mean?" I finally asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Margaret hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. I didn't want to say anything before. It's not my business, and I could have been wrong. But I've seen her more than once now.
Same man.
They meet at a cafe not far from here, and yesterday, well, it didn't look innocent. A cold weight settled in my chest. "Does Daniel know?" I asked. "No," she said quickly. "And I didn't tell anyone else. I thought if it were my son, I'd want to know. Or at least have someone who could decide what to do with that information." I swallowed hard. "Thank you," I said, though the words felt strange, almost inappropriate for what I had just heard. When the call ended, the silence in my kitchen returned, but it was different now. Heavier. Charged. Like something was waiting. I looked down again at the papers. The house. Then at my phone. The affair. Two truths, both powerful in their own way, sitting side by side like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't meant to assemble. For years, I had been shrinking myself to fit into the narrow space Caroline allowed me. Careful not to upset her. careful not to lose what little access I had left to Daniel, to Oliver, to my granddaughter Sophie. I had convinced myself that silence was strength, that patience would eventually be rewarded. But patience had only made me invisible. And now, suddenly, I could see everything more clearly. Caroline hadn't just disliked me. She had been removing me,
piece by piece.
The rest of that morning passed in a blur. I tried to distract myself, washing dishes that were already clean, rearranging drawers that didn't need rearranging, but my mind kept circling back to the same two facts. She was living in my house, and she was betraying my son. By early afternoon, I couldn't sit still anymore. If Margaret was right, and something deep inside me already knew she was, then I needed to see it for myself. Not because I doubted her, but because I needed certainty. Not suspicion. Not assumption.
Truth.
I grabbed my coat, my phone, and the documents, though I wasn't sure why I brought them, and headed out. The cafe Margaret mentioned wasn't far. A quiet place on a corner street, with outdoor seating and large windows that made it easy to see inside without being noticed. I parked across the road, my hands slightly unsteady on the steering wheel. This is ridiculous, I whispered to myself. I wasn't someone who followed people. I wasn't someone who hid behind parked cars or watched from a distance. But then again, I wasn't someone who had been thrown out of her own family's home either. Life changes you. Sometimes slowly. Sometimes all at once. I waited. 10 minutes.
20.
30. Just as I was starting to think I had made a mistake, I saw her.
Caroline.
She walked down the street like she always did, confident, composed, perfectly put together. Sunglasses, tailored coat, effortless grace. And then, he appeared. He stepped out of the cafe as if he had been waiting for her.
Tall.
Well-dressed. Familiar in a way that made my stomach turn, not because I knew him, but because of how easily they fit together. This wasn't new. This wasn't accidental. They greeted each other without hesitation. No distance.
No cuernis.
Just closeness. Too much closeness. I watched as he placed his hand on the small of her back, guiding her inside. Like it was natural. Like it was normal. Like it had happened 100 times before. My chest tightened. Still, I didn't move. I needed to see more. Through the window, I could see them sitting across from each other, leaning in, smiling. Not the polite smiles Caroline used at dinner parties, but something softer.
Real.
I had never seen her look like that with Daniel. Not once. Time seemed to slow. Every movement felt sharper, louder, more defined. The way she reached across the table. The way he covered her hand with his. The way she laughed, head tilted back slightly, completely at ease. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a relationship. I don't know how long I sat there before I realized my phone was already in my hand. I hesitated. Then I opened the camera. At first, it felt wrong, intrusive. But then another memory surfaced, the sound of that glass shattering, the way she looked at me like I was nothing. And something inside me hardened. I took the photo, then another.
And another.
Each one clearer than the last. Each one impossible to explain away. When they finally stood to leave, I started my car but kept my distance. They walked together down the street, their shoulders brushing, their conversation uninterrupted, as if the world around them didn't exist. When they reached a parked car, Caroline glanced around quickly. Careful, but not careful enough. Because what happened next left no room for doubt. She kissed him. Not a quick, uncertain gesture. Not a mistake. A kiss that belonged to someone who had already crossed the line long ago. I captured that too. My hands were shaking now. Not from fear. From something else. Something rising. They got into the car and drove off. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. I had seen enough. More than enough. The drive home felt completely different from the one the night before. The tears were gone. The confusion, too. In their place was something far more dangerous.
Clarity.
Back in my kitchen, I laid everything out again. The documents. The photos. Two separate truths that, together, formed something undeniable. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was thinking.
Carefully. Strategically.
What did I want? Not revenge. That would be too simple. Too empty. I wanted something deeper. I wanted balance. Respect.
Truth.
And maybe, just maybe, for Daniel to finally see things as they really were. I sat down and pulled out a sheet of paper. For a long moment, I didn't write anything. I just stared. Then, slowly, I began. Not with anger, not with accusations, but with facts.
Clear. Calm.
Unavoidable. Because this time, I wasn't going to raise my voice. I wasn't going to beg for understanding. I wasn't going to shrink. This time, I was going to be heard. By the time I finished writing, the sun had started to set. The letter lay in front of me.
Simple. Direct.
Powerful. I placed the photos inside. Then copies of the documents. Sealed the envelope. And rested my hand on top of it.
Monday.
I would go on Monday. Not to argue. Not to fight. But to change everything. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Monday arrived with a strange kind of calm, the kind that doesn't come from peace but from certainty. I woke earlier than usual, before the sun had fully risen, and for a moment I simply lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house. No racing thoughts, no second-guessing, no fear clawing at my chest like it had for so many nights before. Just clarity. I knew exactly what I was going to do, and more importantly, why I was going to do it. That made all the difference. I got up slowly, choosing my clothes with more care than I had in years. Not to impress anyone, especially not Caroline, but because I needed to feel like myself again. I settled on a dark green dress I hadn't worn in a long time, something simple but strong, something that reminded me of the woman I used to be before I started shrinking to make others comfortable. I brushed my hair, applied a touch of makeup, and when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the tired, apologetic woman from a few days ago. I saw someone steadier, someone who had remembered her worth. The envelope was exactly where I had left it on the kitchen table. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my hands, not heavy in a physical sense, but heavy with consequence. Inside it were truths that could no longer be ignored, things Caroline had never expected me to know, let alone confront her with. For a brief second, a flicker of doubt passed through me. Was I about to destroy my son's life? Was I crossing a line I couldn't come back from? But then I remembered the dinner, the humiliation, the years of quiet control, of being pushed aside, of being made to feel like an intruder in my own family. And I realized something important. I wasn't destroying anything. I was exposing what had already been broken. The drive to the house felt shorter than usual. Maybe because my mind wasn't wandering this time. Every turn, every stoplight, every passing street felt deliberate, like I was moving towards something inevitable. When I pulled up outside, the house looked the same as it always did, neat, polished, almost too perfect. If someone didn't know better, they'd think it held a happy family inside. I parked and sat there for a moment, my hands resting on the steering wheel. "You can do this," I said quietly to myself. And for once, I believed it. When I stepped out of the car and walked up to the front door, I didn't hesitate. I rang the bell and waited. My heart was beating, yes, but it wasn't racing. It was steady, grounded. Footsteps approached from inside. The door opened. Caroline stood there, her expression shifting instantly from neutral to irritation the moment she saw me. "Elizabeth," she said flatly. "What are you doing here?" "Good morning, Caroline," I replied calmly. "We need to talk." She let out a small, humorless laugh. If this is about Friday, I really don't have time for another scene. This won't be a scene, I said. It'll be brief. She studied me for a moment, as if trying to figure out what was different. I could almost see the confusion in her eyes. She was used to a version of me that hesitated, that softened, that backed down. That version wasn't standing in front of her anymore. After a pause, she stepped aside. 5 minutes, she said. That's all you're getting. I walked in. The house felt exactly as it had that night. Polished surfaces, carefully arranged furniture, everything in its place, as if nothing had ever happened. But I felt the shift immediately. This time, I wasn't a guest. We moved into the living room. She didn't offer me a seat, but I didn't need one. I stood comfortably, holding the envelope. Well, she said, crossing her arms. What is it? I extended the envelope toward her. This is for you. She looked at it like it might bite her. What is it? Something you need to read. Reluctantly, she took it. Her nails tapped lightly against the paper as she opened it, pulling out the contents with a dismissive air that lasted exactly 3 seconds. That's how long it took for her expression to change. Her eyes moved across the first page of the letter, her posture stiffening slightly. Then she flipped to the documents. I watched her fingers tighten, her grip less controlled now. And when she reached the photographs, everything stopped. The color drained from her face so quickly, it was almost unsettling. She looked at the photos once, then again, then back at me. This is ridiculous, she said, but her voice had lost its edge. There was something else there now.
Panic.
Is it? I asked quietly. These pictures don't prove anything, she snapped, though she didn't sound convinced. And this. She held up the property documents. This has to be outdated. There's no way. It's current, I interrupted calmly. I verified everything yesterday. Silence. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she laughed, sharp, forced hollow. So, what is this? You're spying on me now? Digging through old paperwork? This is insane, Elizabeth. No, I said evenly. What's insane is how long I allowed this to go on. Her eyes narrowed. What exactly do you think you're doing? I took a step forward, not aggressively, just enough to make my presence undeniable. I'm setting a boundary. Her jaw tightened. This is blackmail.
No, iraplia.
This is truth. Something you've been avoiding for a very long time. She threw the papers onto the coffee table, but her hands were shaking now. You think this gives you power over me? I held her gaze. I think it gives me a voice. One you've ignored for years. You wouldn't dare tell Daniel, she said, her tone dropping more dangerous now. It would destroy him. I didn't flinch. That depends on you. That caught her off guard. For the first time since I'd known her, she didn't have an immediate response. You have a choice, I continued, my voice calm but firm. You can end this, whatever this is, and start treating me with the respect I deserve. Or I will tell Daniel everything. And, if necessary, I will take legal steps regarding this house. Her breathing became uneven. I could see it now. The control she had always maintained was slipping, piece by piece. You're bluffing, she said, but it sounded weaker now. I shook my head slightly.
No.
I'm done being silent. Another long pause. Then she stepped closer, her voice low and sharp. You think this makes you strong? You think you've won something?
This isn't about winning, I said.
It's about ending something that should never have been allowed to continue. She stared at me, searching for something, hesitation, doubt, weakness. She didn't find it. Get out, she said finally, her voice tight. Just get out. I nodded. And as I turned toward the door, I added quietly, You have until Friday. I didn't wait for a response. I walked out of the house with the same steady pace I had walked in with, but something had changed. Not outside. Inside. For years, I had felt small in that space. Today,
I didn't.
as I reached my car, I allowed myself one brief glance back. Caroline was standing at the window, watching me, but this time, she wasn't in control. I got into the car, started the engine, and drove away. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I had taken my life back.
I thought I would have until Friday.
I thought Caroline would take time to think, to calculate, to decide how she wanted to play this. I underestimated one thing. People like her don't sit quietly when they feel cornered. They react, and they react fast. By Tuesday afternoon, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. First it was her. I watched her name flash across the screen again and again, each call more aggressive than the last. I didn't answer. Not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't ready to hear whatever version of the truth she was going to try to twist. After the fifth call, she left a voicemail. I didn't listen to it immediately. I already knew the tone. Anger, denial, threats. That was her pattern. Then Daniel called. That one. I couldn't ignore. I let it ring once.
Twice.
3 times. I needed a second to steady myself, because I knew this conversation would change everything. When I finally answered, his voice came through tight, strained. Mom, what's going on? Straight to it.
No greeting. No softness.
Hi, Daniel, I said calmly. Caroline says you came over yesterday and threatened her, he continued. She's really upset. She says you're trying to force us out of the house. There it was. Her version.
Fast.
Efficient. Predictable. I think we should talk in person, I said. He exhaled sharply. Mom, can't you just tell me now? This is serious. So, is what I need to show you, I replied. Please, meet me at the park near Riverside in an hour. There was a pause. I could almost hear him weighing his options, caught between habit, believing his wife, and something else, something uncertain. Fine, he said finally. 1 hour. When the call ended, I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone. This was it. Not the confrontation with Caroline that had already happened. This was the real turning point. My son. I gathered everything again, the photos, the documents, placing them carefully into a folder this time instead of an envelope. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight. Not from fear of Caroline anymore, but from fear of hurting him. Because no matter what she had done, no matter how necessary this was, this would break him. Riverside Park was quiet when I arrived. A few people walked along the paths, some with dogs, others lost in their own thoughts. The river moved steadily, calm and indifferent, as if it had seen thousands of moments like this before. People standing at the edge of decisions they couldn't undo. I sat on a bench facing the water, the folder resting in my lap. I watched the current, letting its rhythm settle my thoughts. When Daniel finally arrived, I saw him before he saw me. His pace was quick, almost restless, his shoulders tense. He looked like he hadn't slept much. For a brief second, I saw not the man he had become, but the boy he used to be, the one who would run to me when something didn't make sense. Mom, he said, stopping in front of me. What is this about? I gestured to the bench. Sit down. He hesitated, then sat, leaning forward slightly, elbows on his knees. Caroline is saying a lot of things, he said. And I don't understand why this is happening. I turned toward him, studying his face. I know you don't, I said softly. That's why we're here. I took a breath. There are 2 things you need to know, I continued. And I'm going to tell you both, but you have to let me finish before you react. He frowned slightly but nodded. The first is about the house, I said. Legally, it's still in my name. That caught him off guard. What? He said, blinking. What do you mean? I explained everything. His father buying the property, the years after his death, how I had given Daniel the house without ever completing the legal transfer. I spoke calmly, clearly, without rushing. Daniel listened, his confusion slowly shifting into realization. So, technically we don't own it? He asked.
Not yet, I said.
But that's something we can fix. That's not the real issue here. He leaned back slightly, running a hand through his hair. Okay, then what is? I felt my throat tighten slightly. The second thing, I said quietly, is about Caroline. His expression changed immediately. What about her? He asked, more guarded now. I opened the folder. She's having an affair. The words landed heavily between us. For a moment, he didn't react at all. Then he let out a short, disbelieving laugh. No, he said. That's not true.
I didn't argue.
I simply handed him the photos. At first, he barely looked at them, like his mind was rejecting the possibility before his eyes could even process it. But then he focused. One image, then another, then the one of the kiss. I watched his face change. Confusion, disbelief,
Pain.
all of it unfolding in real time. No, he whispered. No, this has to be. It's real, I said gently. He stood up suddenly, pacing a few steps away, then back again, like he couldn't stay still inside his own body. How long have you known? He asked. Since Sunday, I replied. A neighbor saw them. I went to confirm it myself. He shook his head, hands on his hips, breathing uneven. Why didn't you tell me right away? I wanted to be sure, I said, and I needed to think about how to handle it. He laughed again, but there was no humor in it. So, instead, you went to her first? You threatened her. I gave her a choice, I said firmly. He stopped pacing and looked at me. A choice. Yes, I said. To end it. To stop what she's been doing, not just the affair, but everything else too. His eyes narrowed slightly. Everything else? I held his gaze. Daniel, she's been isolating you from me for years. He opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. Because somewhere deep down, he knew. She told me you were difficult, he said slowly. That you didn't respect boundaries. That I was the problem. I finished. Silence. The river continued flowing behind us, steady and indifferent. I didn't want to believe it, I said quietly. So I stayed quiet. I stepped back. I accepted whatever scraps of time I could get with you and the children. I thought maybe that was enough. Daniel's shoulders dropped slightly. But it wasn't. I continued. And what happened the other night, that wasn't just stress. That was years of something much deeper. He looked down at the photos again, his hands trembling slightly now. I don't know what to do, he admitted. And there it was. Not anger, not denial, just broken uncertainty. I stood and walked over to him, placing a hand gently on his arm. You don't have to decide everything right now, I said. But you do deserve the truth. He nodded slowly, still staring at the images. I need to talk to her, he said finally. I know, I replied. He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. I should have listened to you, he said quietly. I shook my head. We can't change the past, only what we do next. He exhaled deeply, like the weight of everything was finally settling in. Can I come by later? He asked. With the kids? My heart tightened, not from pain this time, but from something warmer. Of course, I said softly. Always. As the sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the park, we stood there together, not on opposite sides anymore, not divided by someone else's narrative. For the first time in years, we were facing the truth together. And no matter how painful it was, that was the beginning of something real. 6 months is enough time for a life to fall apart and begin again in a completely different shape. When I look back now, that day in the park feels like a turning point carved into everything that came after it. Not because it was easy, it wasn't, but because it was honest, and honesty, no matter how painful, has a way of clearing space for something new to grow. The first weeks after Daniel confronted Caroline were the hardest. He told me later how it unfolded, how she denied everything at first, just like I knew she would, how she tried to twist the story, shift the blame, even suggest that I had fabricated the entire thing out of jealousy. But evidence has a weight that words cannot easily lift, and when he showed her the photos, when he refused to look away from them, something in her finally cracked. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough for the truth to begin slipping through the gaps. He came to my house that same night with Oliver and Sophie. I still remember the knock on the door, not hesitant, not uncertain, just heavy. When I opened it, Daniel stood there with two small bags and a look on his face I hadn't seen since he was a boy facing something he didn't understand. The children clung to him, confused but quiet, sensing that something important had shifted even if they didn't have the words for it. I stepped aside without saying anything, and they came in. That was the moment my house stopped being just mine again, and became something else, a place of refuge, of rebuilding, of fragile beginnings. Those early days were filled with questions that had no easy answers. Oliver asked why they weren't going home. Sophie wanted to know if her mother was coming too. Daniel didn't always know what to say, and neither did I, but we tried to be gentle with the truth, without overwhelming them. Children understand more than we think, but they also need space to process it in their own way. So we created routines, simple ones. Breakfast together, walks in the park, quiet evenings with stories. Stability became our priority, even when everything underneath it still felt uncertain. The legal process moved forward whether we were ready for it or not. Caroline resisted at first. Of course she did. There were threats, accusations, attempts to regain control through anger. But this time, Daniel didn't fold. He didn't retreat into silence or let himself be guided by her version of reality. That was the difference. That was everything. With the evidence in front of him and the clarity he had finally found, he stood his ground. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. The marriage, as painful as it was to admit, had already been broken long before that day in the park. For me, the shift was quieter, but just as profound. For years, I had measured my place in the family by how little space I took up, how careful I was not to interfere, how much I was willing to endure in order to stay close. Now, suddenly, I was at the center again, not because I forced myself there, but because I stopped stepping away. It was an unfamiliar feeling at first. I found myself hesitating, second-guessing simple things, like whether I was overstepping by helping too much or speaking too openly. But slowly, day by day, that hesitation faded. I wasn't intruding. I was participating. There is a difference, and I had forgotten it. Daniel changed too. Not overnight, not perfectly, but noticeably. He listened more. He questioned things he used to accept without thinking. And perhaps most importantly, he started to see me, not as the version of me he had been told to believe in, but as I actually was. There were moments, small but meaningful, when he would look at me with a kind of quiet recognition, as if he was piecing together something he should have understood long ago. I never held that against him. Life has a way of distorting perception, especially when trust is placed in the wrong hands. About 3 months in, something unexpected happened. Caroline reached out. Not through Daniel, not through lawyers, but directly to me. At first, I wasn't sure how to respond. Old instincts told me to be cautious, to expect manipulation, to prepare for another attempt to control the narrative. But when she showed up at my door, she didn't look like the woman I had known. There was no polished confidence, no sharp edge in her voice, no carefully constructed superiority. She looked tired, stripped of something she had relied on for a long time. "I'm not here to argue," she said before I could speak. I need to say something." I let her in, not because I had forgiven her, not yet, but because I wanted to understand what had changed. Her apology wasn't perfect. It wasn't eloquent or deeply reflective in the way people sometimes expect. But it was real. She didn't deny what she had done. She didn't try to justify it with long explanations. She admitted to feeling insecure, to being threatened by the bond Daniel and I had, to trying to control what she didn't understand instead of confronting it honestly. It didn't erase the past, and it didn't undo the damage, but it mattered. Because for the first time, she wasn't trying to win. She was trying to acknowledge. Daniel was cautious about it, and rightfully so. Trust isn't rebuilt through a single conversation. But for the sake of the children, we found a way to coexist.
Carefully.
Respectfully. With boundaries that were finally clear and enforced. Oliver and Sophie needed their mother, and despite everything, she loved them. That had never been in question. The challenge was making sure that love didn't come with the same patterns that had caused so much harm before. As for the house, that chapter closed in a way I hadn't expected. Legally, it had always been mine, but emotionally, it no longer felt like something I wanted to hold on to. Too much had happened within those walls. Too many memories, both good and painful, layered over each other in ways that couldn't easily be separated. So I made a decision, one that felt right, not just practical. I transferred ownership to Daniel, not as a gesture of control, not as leverage, but as a clean beginning. A way for him to rebuild something that was truly his, without shadows from the past hanging over it. When I showed him the final documents, he was speechless. He tried to refuse at first, said it was too much, that I had already done enough. But I insisted, not because he owed me anything, but because this wasn't about debt. It was about moving forward. Now, 6 months later, the house feels different. Lighter. Not perfect, life rarely is, but honest. The children laugh again, without hesitation. Daniel smiles more, genuinely, without that constant tension behind his eyes.
And I
feel like I've come back to myself in a way I didn't realize I had lost. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I think back to that night. The shattered glass, the silence, the humiliation. At the time, it felt like the lowest point, like something that would stay with me as a mark of defeat. But now I see it differently. It wasn't the end of something valuable. It was the breaking point of something that needed to end. Not everything that falls apart is a loss. Sometimes it's a release. And sometimes what you rebuild afterward is stronger precisely because it had to be rebuilt at all.